It has been a joyous morning of technological challenges, one after the other. I've got a mic pack that is a little finicky, that if you don't push it all the way in and just hold your tongue the right way, it may not go right. And the whole sound system didn't work this morning. It's just been great. That's right. And it was fun. I know. The shout of celebration that came out of me when I rerouted the system to work was it was great. We are working through the 5 times that Paul says the saying is trustworthy, right? There are 5 trustworthy sayings that Paul writes in his pastoral letters to emphasize something. And it could be, some argue, that it's just a way for him to make something he's saying bold. Really pay attention to what I'm saying. Zoom in on this. Make sure you're not going to miss this. I tend to think of it rather as those phrases that your parents used ad nauseum when you were children, right? Like I said last week, my dad's, one of his favorites was garbage in, garbage out, right? Or what you do today affects what you get to do tomorrow, those kind of things, right? I think that's what Paul's doing. I think Paul's been on the road with Timothy so long, and he goes around and preaches the glorious message of the gospel so many times that eventually you fall into a way of phrasing things the same way every time, right? And so he really wants to emphasize this. And so last week, we started this off in 1 Timothy 1, and now we move to 1 Timothy 3. These are the 5 times it happens are in pastoral letters, right? It isn't just him writing to a whole group of people or a whole area of churches, but rather him speaking directly to someone that he's brought up in the faith to be like, hey, let me remind you, right, of the things that we've said, right? During the 5 years I got to serve as Joe's worship leader, I can't count how many times in the midst of our conversation we would just say, but grace. You know, they're wrong, and this needs to be fixed, and how dare they, and this can't ever happen again, but grace. You know, and it just, but grace. You know, had different attitudes to it, but it's one of those phrases that's just stuck in my head. But grace. But grace. Yes, they're wrong. Yes, it's a problem. But grace. I know. It's hard. But I know. But grace. I don't want to. Right, that's exactly right. Right. So this first of the sayings that we talked about is Paul giving us the gospel in a peculiar way of saying that the saying is trustworthy, right, and needs to be fully accepted. That Christ came and died for sinners, and I am the worst of them. Right? Now, a lot of people will just stop before the I am the worst of them, and maybe that's where his saying stopped. But I encourage you to consider that I think each of us needs to make that our own saying. Sure, I haven't killed Christians because they're Christians, but I know what I've done. It is on this that everything else can be built. If we do not understand the mercy of God that has drawn us into a new relationship through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, then there's nothing to build. If we don't understand who our King is and what caused him to be enthroned, then no matter how simply I try and explain the kingdom to you, you won't ever be a part of it. We must start first to recognize our own need for him. And on this now is the basis of all of the life of the church. That's the ground floor, right? As we went through Christmas, we talked about the same thing, right? Broken, beautiful things. That's what the church is. People who mourn and recognize their brokenness and see God work in and through it. I am the worst, but grace. And so, after chapter 2, because context is important, Paul starts introducing us to church life, right? And he kind of puts us in a quick framework of understanding, right? There's your king or your president, you know. They didn't have those back then. Democracy's great, right? So, there's your king, and then there's your men, and then there's your women. He walks it out through chapter 2 to pay attention to the fact that I've created you in such a way, and that you've been left in a world that is such a way, that you need to first and foremost pray for kings and all in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life. And that men need to lead in such a way as to not hurt or to harm or to force or to be angry in any situation, right? We seem to skip over how hard that is for men to understand because of how hard it is for women to understand the next one. But that's a much longer conversation that we ain't getting into this morning. He's setting up the life of the church, and then we're introduced to his second trustworthy saying, right? Now, I'm sharing my study of these because I think they are edifying and I think they're important, especially for the moment that this church finds itself in right now, where we find ourselves in together, right? It has taken holy leadership for us to get where we are right now. And now the work begins in building on the freedom that we have just won for ourselves. And if we're going to build the kingdom, if we're going to be this community of broken people that love and support each other and that admit our faults and rejoice as we take one little tiny step towards Jesus, when we're a community that's going to be patient with each other, but also a community that is passionate about serving the almost 200 people that are in our building week in and week out, and that's just for school. Never mind the other 200 people that are in our building week in and week out here for recreational activities. We have the opportunity, right? We got them trapped, y'all. Right? Just like sit at the door and be like, can we talk? Right? It's the same thing as a pumpkin patch, right? We have the opportunity. This is who we are, right? We want the deep stuff because we want to overflow in our world with the thing that God does with us in that area. And it requires leadership for us to do that. And that's where we go this morning. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. There's three words that really jump out to me. Never mind the fact that you may be interested in an overseer. We'll come back to that. That jump out to me to talk about what's happening here, right? The first is just aspire, right? In Greek, it's literally you actually stretching yourself to as far as you can make it, right? It's what Jess does before she gives up and asks me to get something down from the place she can't reach in the kitchen, right? Right? Well, okay, maybe after the third or fourth attempt, you don't even try and you're like, right? But it is that stretching and trying desperately to be able to reach for something. That's what's happening in this aspiring. There's another place where Paul uses the same word in the same book, 1 Timothy chapter 6. He says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. The word translated here in the ESV as craving is the same word, right? It is this yearning that is actionable, right? I mean, when I really want hot wings, you know what I'm about to get? Hot wings. You ain't gonna stop me. My goodness. All right? It's just, it gets to that place, right? It is something that you aspire to, right? There is motion involved in this. It isn't just something I want it really bad. It's like, I'm gonna go get it, right? This is what it means to aspire to. It's having ambition, and I think it's a reasonable question. What is the ambition of a Christian? I mean, you look at the world we live in, and the ambitions that are encouraged in everything you watch on TV or anywhere else, are any of those ambitions actually ambitions we should have as children of God? Odds are no, right? Do I want to make an impact on my world and encourage people to love one another? Yes, right? Can that be wrapped up somehow in an ambition to have some sort of political office? Maybe, right? Am I going to get elected if I don't do a couple things to make sure that ambition is really well known that may go against what I was trying to establish in the first place? Probably. And we can pick on Congress, that's fine. We can pick on other people. We can pick on musicians. We can pick on teachers. We can pick on lots of things, right? What is your ambition and what are you after? And is there an ambition of the Christian life? I think very clearly it has to be understood that it's holiness. That the ambition of a Christian is to be pure. The ambition, what we yearn for, what we aspire toward, is holiness, is a character that reflects God entirely, right? My aspiration, my ambition as a child of God is to
work and live to that point where I hear said to me, well done, good and faithful servant? Is there anything else that comes close to the prize of that? No, of course not, right? It is our ambition to love and to serve. And the question really fits of, well, what about my career? How does that fit into it? This has been an interesting question for me, not just the career question, but this whole study, and I think why I kind of found myself studying these 5 things in the midst that I find myself in a weird place, right? Because I'll be honest, I want to be a pastor. You know what I mean? Like, I found the place where I was like, yes, got it. Harmony, beauty, blessing. So happy about it, right? Lots of pain, lots of frustration, lots of difficulty, and I love every minute of it, right? Right? And so then comes the moment where, okay, well, you cannot do that anymore, so you've got to figure out a way to support your family while, let's face it, I'm still going to do it. You're not going to stop me, right? Yeah? But now I'm a teacher and a and a basketball coach. Yeah, that's right. Go Cavs. Right? And the question just has to sit there of like, okay, but what's your career? Because that's how our world talks about those things. You have to have a career. You have to have a retirement. You have to have some package that when someone meets you and says like, well, what do you do? What do? I pray and breathe and eat and laugh, and what are you talking about? Right? And the reality is we so mix ourselves up with our career that's our identity, which is unacceptable. Which is not the Christian ambition, right? And I know many, I love many, who have sacrificed most of their lives for the purpose of that ambition of a career. To have a role that they wanted to have a paycheck that they wanted to have, whatever it was, right? It's a difficult thing that I'm not going to say is this overarching rule that should be applied to everybody, because almost in no circumstance is that the right decision. But we do have to take seriously, right? Is my career as a teacher, is it actually empowering me to be faithful in what I'm called to do, right? Or is it something that's actually pulling me away from it? Right? Which is the reason that when I suddenly needed a job, I intentionally prayed and looked for something that was going to blend, kind of, right? Or that I could actually take ministry and continue in that focus, which is why I'm at a Christian academy. The second thing that jumps out to me is if anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task, a beautiful task, this noble work. One of the things that Paul really wants us to understand here is that church leadership, is something that needs to be appreciated deeply. Right? Now, it's not the only work of the church. It's not the only job that church folk gonna have, right? We don't all need to be pastors, right? We don't all need to be worship leaders. We don't all need to be greeters and doing finance and all the other things that happen at the church, right? We all are parts of the body. And even though the mouth might be the loudest one, right, it's not the most important in many cases, right? Church leadership is not the only work to be done. We need the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker. But man does not live by bread alone, but from every word that comes from the mouth of God. Paul's not instructing the Christian ambition. He's not. Does this make sense? He's not saying to you, if you desire well, then you'll desire to be a pastor. No. He's not instructing Christian ambition. He's instructing the life of the church. That when someone in our community desires to be in that place, it's a good thing. Which is not always how we respond to that. Because of how protective we can be of it. Just like, nope, that person's got to be X, Y, and Z, and I don't see that in you, so sit down and shut up. Right? I think we're far quicker sometimes to stamp that stuff out to actually encourage it, which is a problem. Do you have this desire? It's good. It's great to seek for such an office, right? He might even be Paul talking directly to Timothy, right? You're doing well. Don't give up, don't slow down, right? It is good and right that you want to be in the position that you're in. I know it can be a thankless job serving in sometimes embittered and immature hearts, but don't let anybody look down on you because of your age and your experience as if you don't know what's going on. We just talked about this. 1 Timothy 4:10. Did I do that? Right? Don't let anybody look down on you for this, right? It is good for you to desire for this position. It's good for you to long for this. It is a noble task that you're taking over, right? I think there is encouragement in this verse for those of us who want this, right? But if this is not your desire, which, let's face it, I know how many of you would react. Not in a million years. You couldn't pay me or threaten me enough to possibly consider taking on those roles. That's fine. But if that's you, you need to know, you absolutely have to know that it is a necessary office that is worthy of your appreciation and your submission. Now, I'm sorry that I'm the one saying this, because it's weird to say that about myself. But I'm not saying it about myself. I'm saying it about the place that pastors and bishops and priests hold. Right? It's the reason we use the word reverend. Right? I remember Noah saw that on my desk, right? It said Reverend Alex McGinnis on it. He was like, "What's that?" I was like, "Well, I'll tell you what it is. Two things. One, technically, it means that you're supposed to respect me. That feels weird coming out of my own mouth, but let's just be honest about what the word means. Secondly, I said, the reason that it's actually on my desk is not so that you can be reminded. It's just like, oh, excuse me, this is the Reverend. You've met those people, right? God bless them. I love them, right? You know what I mean? You get to their voicemail, and it's just like, you've reached the Holy Apostle, John. You know what I mean? Like, right? Don't do that. Yeah, right. Like if somebody, if you call me Reverend, that's probably fine. But but can you imagine if I was like, I am because it's always the Reverend Alex McGee. Get out of here, right? You know what I mean? So I said, the reason it's on my desk is not to remind you of what you're supposed to think of me. I told him, I said, it's to remind me of what I've given myself to, right? That if we're going to have an office, a place in the church, right, that is going to be the astounding claim that the head of our church is the head of our pastor, so that we submit to our... That's a crazy thing to say, but it's exactly what the New Testament says. If there's going to be authority in a person, then what better thing to remind that person than how seriously they need to take it, right? Which is why James says, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, that we're held to a higher standard. You need to know that it's a necessary office, worthy of your appreciation and submission. Right? The church must have leaders. And this isn't a man-made, that's the government. That's, we pray it all the time here, don't we? Right? Lord, if it's of man, tear it to the ground. Burn it. Drown it. Get rid of it. We don't want it. And he's been faithful to do that for us a lot of times over the last couple of years. But one of the things that he's not going to do is he's not going to get rid of leadership because he gave it to us. Right? It's the reason the New Testament has authority, is because it was written by the people that Jesus gave authority to. If you're not one of them, if you're not one of the church leaders, then you must hold them accountable and support them. We can't all be leaders. We shouldn't all be leaders. Right? That's not how this works. Right? Too many chiefs, not enough. What is it? Yeah. Right. But we all are responsible and equal. Let me really emphasize that point. That there is no hierarchy in the church. Right? There is voluntary submission to one another. And that includes those in an office. Right? But if you're not in the office, then it is your job to support me and call me out. Right? You can't just do one of those things. Right? You can't just give me a card at Christmas and be like, I really appreciate you, which I appreciate that, right? And not also be like, hey, you said something dumb. We need to talk about that. The church must have leaders, which means that we follow them and we listen to them, right? And not just the little bits you like that occasionally comes out of them, right? Because the reality is that what is certainly clear in this chapter is that the church cannot outgrow its leadership. Our church cannot outgrow its leadership. If we don't have people step up to be in leadership, if we don't lift up people to submit to be under their leadership, if we don't actually participate in what Christ has given us in the church to build up the kingdom, then the church cannot grow. In our study of the Word, in the administration of actually putting this place together and deciding what's happening, right, in our service, right? Again, back to 1 Timothy 2, right? King, men, women. Where's my brain? 1 Corinthians 7, right? Of church, as Christ is the head, and then the leadership and the members. It's a noble task, right? Which either means that if you're in that task, good for you for wanting to be in it. Now do it right and take it seriously. And if you're not in that office, then take it seriously by supporting it and submitting to it. And the last thing is it's something that you want. It's desire. This is the part that shook me, right? That if anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. This is the same Greek word that Jesus uses for lust. So, what's up with that? Right? It's what you long for, right? When Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says that if you lust after a woman in your heart, it's the same thing as committing adultery. Right? So it's mercy. Anyway, I know, right? It's the same word that's used there. And so for me, it's an interesting question. Do you know the difference between lust and desire? I mean, for instance, when we talk about lust, it's not just about sex, right? Because it's right for me to desire my wife, right? Did that make you uncomfortable? Can we talk about these things? We okay? I know, right? Right? But at the same time, even though she is my wife, I can actually lust after her, can I? Of course I can. Here's where I came down on this. I think the missing piece to understand the separation between desire and lust is what you actually aspire to. Right? Like, for instance, just my confessions, I lust after being in really great shape, right? And being strong and capable to keep up with the basketball players on the court, which you can't, right? I lust after that. The reason I use the word lust is because you know what I don't do at 5 a.m. every morning? I don't get up, even though I talk about it. I daydream about it all the time. I'm going to get up at 5, and I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to get some kind of workout in, and then that way I'm ready. I'll get the kids put together, and that way I can get to work on time, and it'll be great. Right. And I set an alarm. I do. I don't get up. Right? I don't aspire to it. Right? I'll start it, I'll do some pull-ups, I'll even eat some kale and be like, I don't know, hot wings. Right? Yeah. Right. The same can be said about lusting sexually, right? It's turning a person into an object that you don't want to do the work of intimacy. Right? I just want to use you for a bit, right? I don't actually want to have a relationship with you because that would be difficult. That would be the hard part, like getting up in the morning and going for a run. And we can see it in churches too. Lusting after some image of what the church ought to be. What ministry the church should be involved with. The pastor should be doing X, Y, and Z and anything else, right? But we do nothing to strive for it. We do nothing to actually reach for it and stretch ourselves to be after it, right? I struggled with this word desire because I struggled with my desire to lead the church. That felt like an icky thing, right? God got a hold of me. Everything changed. I cannot fully describe the miraculous work of God in my own heart. And the first thing I thought of was like, I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. Clear as day. Peace that I cannot describe to you. And I was like, that's not good, is it? You shouldn't want to be like that. God's supposed to like call you into it, right? Because that's what people say. It's not what the Bible says. That could be true. Bible doesn't say that either. I know. Right. So then I read 1 Peter 5, right? So in 1 Peter, he says, I exhort the elders among you, and me too, I'm a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. So I'm exhorting you, elders, and myself. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, not because you have to, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock, right? And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. I was in seminary, and I was telling people, like, no, nobody in the right mind wants to be a pastor, right? It's something you find yourself in a position where it's like, well, that's the only way to be faithful to God. If I could, I'd do anything else. Absolutely. Amen. Hallelujah. You know what I mean? It's just, but that was the only way that I was going to do that. And this is, then I read 1 Peter 5. It's just like, no. You don't do it because you have to. You don't do it because someone told you, God has a call in your life. And you're like, I don't think he does. And they're like, oh, but you're really good at X, Y, and Z, and so you really have to be in this place of position. I don't feel good about this. I don't want this. Then don't do it. I mean, you got to want to get your butt kicked week after week of all the people you're trying to love. Sheep bite hard. You know what I mean? Especially goats. We'll explain why that works really well in the Jesus parable later. So that's exactly right. Right? We're not called by God to be a pastor, right? I was not taken up to the third heaven to see Jesus face to face by his mercy in order to be sent right back down and become an apostle, right? That's not what happened. It was great. It wasn't that. Right? It was, Lord, I want to lead others, and I want to raise them up in the fear of you. Right? It was, like we talked about a few weeks ago, right? It was the response of Isaiah sitting in the throne room of God, overhearing the call of God for someone to go, and he said, me, here am I. Right? I'll go. If we desire it, then we must aspire to it. And what follows our trustworthy statement here in Timothy is a list of qualifications for overseeing the church. Now, a little bit of a nerdy side note, if you don't mind. You okay? Okay. So, you may have noticed that Paul said the word overseer. Your translation may even read bishop. And Peter just said the word elder. The word here in Timothy, episkopos, it means overseer, or it's translated as bishop, right? The word that Peter uses is presbyteros, and that is the word that translates to be elder, right? And both of those words probably sound a little bit familiar because that's where we get the words episcopal and Presbyterian, right? That's right, and it's plenty other places, right? And you even have poimen, which is another word that's used only really once, right, to talk about being a shepherd or a pastor. And the only time that's talked about as a role is in Ephesians 4. It seems to be somehow separate in some way than we talk about administrative authoritative offices, right? So we have a bishop, an elder, and a pastor, right? Or an overseer, if you really don't like that word because you're thinking of a dude in a funny hat, right? An elder and pastor, right? And this comes down to the way churches get organized, right? That there is Episcopal and Presbyterian and then congregational, quite frankly, right? The Episcopal is a church that's going to have a bishop at the top to oversee the churches underneath them, right? That's the model, what it means to have an Episcopal organization. Presbyterian is going to be something that's ran by a board of elders, right? And you can go visit those people. Right? And congregational is really something that's just going to say, no, we all together, we're going to all make our decisions together, right? And somebody's got to get up and talk, so that'll be the guy that runs his mouth a lot, right? And the thing is the Bible never actually says this is how you ought to organize your church, right? Otherwise, we'd be arguing about this. Instead, we just kind of give each other weird looks as we pass by when we go to lunch on Sunday. You know what I mean? Like, well, it's just like, I don't know about you. Right? You can go to Acts 15 where they make this really important decision about what's going on in the church, and you can look at it and you can see how there was clearly an overseer who made a decision. There were also a group of elders that made a decision, and there was also a congregation that made a decision, right? I think it's possible that we could pick one and it would be fine, right? And we could even compare ourselves to the other ones that do something different, and we ought to end up in the same place. Probably not your organization that failed you. It's probably your heart and your faithfulness. I say all this to say that, like I said, I think these 5 sayings help us pay attention to some important aspects of building a new church, right? The Global Methodist Church is an Episcopal-styled church, meaning that there is an overseer, there's a bishop, right? There is someone to preside over churches in a single area, right? Now, what seems to be clear in the New Testament is that these are interchangeable words, bishop and elder. It just happens over and over again. You're either using one or you're using the other one. And so, generally speaking, the models of leadership in the church are elder, which would also be understood to be the overseer, and deacon, right? And then the pastor seems to be more about a spiritual gift than about an office. Elders in an area in this church, let me just try and plug it in so that we understand where this is going. Elders and bishops are overlapping terms, which is why the GMC doesn't separate between those two people. Rather, elders are elected for a time to serve in the role of bishop, and then will never serve as bishop again in their history as a pastor. Right? Some of the changes and different things that happen in comparison to our former denomination. They rotate into the service of oversight of the whole, right, while overseeing the local church. The deacon is the role of leadership in service and in ministry. Diakoneo is what this means, right? The person who's bringing you a Coke at lunch is a deacon, according to Greek, right? They didn't even get ordained. We seek to ordain these offices through the whole collection of churches to unite us in leadership and accountability. But there are lay versions of these offices as well. As we talk about ordained ideas of being an elder or a deacon in the Global Methodist Church, there are also, call them not ordained, but they're just as important, if not more important, lay ministers that do the same things, right? That I encourage us to consider going through trainings and being in that office of our church so that if Russ gets sick and needs a preacher, just like, hey, Noah's ready, send him, right? Right? There ought to be clear leadership. In the book of James, at the end of it, we are to call on the elders when we're sick. Do you know who those people are in this church? Yeah? Hopefully some of us are kind of obvious. You know what I mean? But they need to be. They need to be clearly understood in what that is, right? These lay versions of offices are necessary to the life of the church and the faithfulness of the denomination. The decision makers for this body and its ministries are delegated the authority of the church's leadership, right? And as we get settled and get everything put in place and have our new board members in place, I'm going to ask them to stand right here in front of you so that you know who these people are, right? The blessed people who are willing to make sure that our budget is working in the right direction. Or the blessed SPR chair that's willing to make sure that I'm not running amok. Or all the people in our school aren't running amok. And we can go on and on and on, right? Other one that has to be mentioned is the people who just make sure the lights are still on, right? That's incredibly important and a very big job. As we build this up, right, I want to focus here because this is important for us to recognize that we should long to be a part of the leadership of the church, whether that is in overseer positions or in the other positions to oversee little things, because delegation's a good idea. So we can nerd out about this stuff at another time, right? To talk about, if you're interested and you want to know some more things about the different styles of leadership in church, or the ways that has changed over history, or the peculiarities of the Global Methodist Church, or what that will look like in this church, I invite you to do that. But just real quickly, notice the qualifications here in 1 Timothy. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife. Now, a lot of these have been used legalistically in a lot of ways, right? This is a good example, right? So that if a person has been involved in a divorce, it means that they've got to be kicked out of anything that happens. And if stuff happens in the midst of the office, maybe that's true. But this isn't to say that you can only have one wife in your life, right? It is that you're faithful to your wife, right? It's the whole but grace conversation, right? Sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. Right? Notice only one of those was actually a skill or a gift. That seems important to me. He must manage his household well, and with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? We're a big old family, right? If my kids can't act right in my house, then how the heck am I going to get us to act right when we're here? Right? That's reasonable. If I can't manage my own money, right, and hopefully learn the lessons that I learned through my student debt, then how is it possible that we can manage the money here at the church? If I can't keep myself attentive and sober-minded and aware of what's going on around me throughout the week, then how can you trust me to do those things for you? Right? Now notice, each of these things is about your character. More important than what you're capable of, how well you speak or how well you know the Bible or, any of the gifts and talents that we have, more important than anything is your holiness, is your personal character. It's what is being the focus here. Because again, a church cannot outgrow its leadership. And if we're here for the deep things, if we're here to take those deep things and overflow them into our community, then we need deep people who are going to drive us even deeper, and are driving themselves deeper ahead of us constantly. Otherwise, I don't want it. Otherwise, we're not going to go anywhere. It's not a matter about how well you can speak, right? Or how well we start on time or end on time. It's not about how good the music sounds, right? It's about the heart of God being present in a community, being present in its leader, right? He must not be a recent convert, or he may be puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. And moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. Right? You could like me all you want. If I leave this place and act in such a way that everyone else around me is like, that guy's a schmuck, right? Time to find a new one. This is a problem. I go around Pike County burning every bridge I can find, right? Okay, time to move on. Yes? It matters how I carry myself in every conversation with every single person, when the doors are closed, when the doors are open, when the mic is on, and when it's off. All right? The qualifications of leadership in the church is not about what you're gifted or what you're capable of in that way, right? Because character is the bed out of which our gifts grow in the first place. If I have a hard, twisted, cruel heart, then if I'm a good speaker, that ain't because the Holy Spirit's speaking through me, right? There's plenty of talented, unbelieving people, right? Some of them are real strong and real tall and dominate sports. God didn't give, no, that's not how this works. The Holy Spirit isn't acting through them to hit that shot, right? Sorry, been playing too much basketball. So let me ask this. And it's the same thing with the deacons. I'm sorry, we're gonna love the deacons, but we're running out of time. Same thing with the deacons, the same expectations. It's not just a matter of whether or not you're going to get up and preach. It's also a question of whether or not you're going to serve food to the homeless. Right? It's also a question of whether or not you're going to oversee our finances and make sure those things are there. Right? The question is always a focus of the heart. It's the question that the Bible cares about on every page. So what do you desire? What do you desire? What do you want? And what do you aspire after? Are those actually in line with each other? Is the church even on that radar? Now, don't mishear me. I'm not talking about Life Springs Church of Pike Incorporated and asking whether or not the building and the ministries and the things we try and build or our finances are on your radar. That's not what I asked. Us. This beautiful, broken mess of glorious children of God, right? When you think about what you want and what you aspire to, is this even in your consideration? May I encourage you that it needs to be, that it actually is a priority. And do I fit the character of elder? If it's a desire for you to participate in this sort of leadership, then that has to be a question for yourself. But as insane as it sounds, I ask you that question of me. Because each and every week, I step up in front of you as if we've agreed upon that. And what you need to know is that that is always something that needs to be challenged and inspected and paid attention to. And I want it enough to actually open myself up to that. Will you follow me? Will you rebuke me? Will you correct me? Are you growing and striving for holiness in all things? Paul closes the idea by saying, I hope to come to you soon, verse 14, but I'm writing these things to you so that if I delay, if it takes me too long to get there, you may know how one ought to behave in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, a pillar and buttress of the truth. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness, that he was manifested in the flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, and taken up in glory. We are the pillar, the foundation, the wall that holds it all together. We are the buttress of truth, Paul says. That we reveal in our character, in our leadership, and in our submission to leadership, the truth of God. That Christ came and died for sinners, of whom I am the foremost. The incarnate Christ, his atoning death, his regenerating resurrection. That even the leadership and relationship of this church reveals to the world, is made to be the foundation, the pillar, the stand on which that little light of mine stands, so that it has more room to shine throughout the whole house. That we get to hold that up. And the way we hold that up is the way we are in relationship with each other.